I think we're going to record. All right. Just about to say that. Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us, Dieter. We're really excited to have you here. As you know, we're very customer obsessed at this organization. And so bringing in a customer, getting the voice of the customer is always so helpful for our team. You're joining a collection of CSMs here. So there are CSMs from our ISV business, our D&B business, our enterprise business, all based in, for the most part, NorCal. So there's about 20, 25 of us here in person and on the bridge. So thank you again for joining. We're really excited to chat with you. My name is Nick. I'm one of the leaders here at the organization. And maybe I'll just do a quick intro for you, and then we'd love to hear about your background in your own words. But for those of you on the bridge, Dieter's joining us from Roku. He's been working in Cloud Ops since 2013 with companies like Google and Netflix and Intuit. He's currently a senior cloud governance engineer at Roku. He's also an SME in cloud financial management and an O'Reilly media author and a YouTube creator. And he's FinOps certified and a FinOps ambassador, which is very cool. I'm actually learning about the FinOps program. I understand there's only 36 FinOps ambassadors in the world right now. So very interesting. And Dieter, perhaps you can just, in your own words, share your background and maybe a bit about the FinOps ambassador role, just to get us started here.
Yeah, of course. So the FinOps Foundation is part of the Linux Foundation, and it has over 10,000 members. It was founded in 2000, in the later half of that year. And out of 10,000 members, they have about 36 ambassadors, and I'm one of them. What do ambassadors do? Exactly this kind of thing, right? We speak at events, we evangelize, and I also do a lot of outreach, right, to peer companies, to get an idea of what the marketplace looks like, what the industry looks like, those kind of things, right? My background started in FinOps in 2013. When I left PayPal, I looked around for job opportunities, and I saw that Google had 174 listings, right? So I was thinking, hey, what's the worst case that can happen if I apply for a job there? They reject me, so I'm no better off than what I currently have, right? So I applied for a job. What I didn't know back then is that Google has actually hiring queues, right? So if you apply for a program manager position, there's actually maybe half a dozen people in that queue, and they then get randomly assigned to positions within Google, right? So it's a novel hiring process that is kind of interesting how that works. And my background when I left from PayPal was I managed the network operation center within PayPal, right? And that allowed me to have knowledge about all the different systems and how they interact with each other, right? And so the hiring manager at Google actually picked me out of the queue specifically because they needed someone with that kind of background to be able to carve out inefficiencies of Google's internal services and assign them to the public cloud offering, right? Because back then, their public cloud offering was growing so rapidly that they couldn't keep up with building data centers because data centers take about 2 years to complete. And so they needed a stopgap measure, someone who finds inefficiencies and then can assign them to the public cloud offering. And I really like this job. And but I also realized that I made myself unemployable. All my skills were Google internal skills, right? And people wouldn't know back then in 2013, right? They didn't know about Colossus, Bigtable, Spanner, and those kind of things, right? Google since has been a little bit more open about their internal services. But when Netflix approached me and said like, hey, we're looking for someone with that background that can find inefficiencies, because back then in 2015, Netflix was spending about $250 million on Amazon Web Services. And they knew that they had inefficiencies, right? And they needed someone to find those inefficiencies and remediate them. And I have been doing Cloud FinOps since then. You're muted, Nick. Someone muted the conference room.
I did mute it because it had some background noise.
Can you unmute Nick? Because I don't think he can unmute himself.
Here we go.
There. Well, he still seems to be.
How about now, Dieter?
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. Okay, great. Yeah, I was saying it sounds like FinOps actually picked you before you picked FinOps in a sense, but then you really embraced that and saw the need in the industry and have leaned in to become a subject matter expert. Can you just tell us about the certification that you went through? Like, how, tell us about that credential. I'm just curious about the training and the breadth. Is it all cloud? Is it AWS specific? Just a little color there would be interesting.
It is not AWS specific. It goes across, all major cloud vendors. And the training itself really gives you a sense of what the principles are, what the best practices are, how to collaborate, how to partner with people, right? So it's more of a broader, less service specific training, right? There are some deep dives on, how to right size things. What are the common things for each cloud provider where there is waste, like orphaned volumes or underutilized virtual machines, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, what a great skill set to have in this day and age, particularly this year. I think it's no secret there's been quite a lot of interest in cost optimization, and I'm sure you've been very busy. In fact, Dina, I think you've been working closely with Dieter on this at Roku. Maybe you could chat a bit about the cost optimization that you've partnered on.
Yeah, Dieter, as a senior cloud governance engineer, we were able to achieve a remarkable improvement in price performance. And can you tell us more about your approach?
Yeah, we did a couple of things, right? The obvious low-hanging fruit of using savings plans, right, and getting up to 80% coverage. That can be done centrally, right? So that's relatively simple to do. You don't need engineering engagement. But then we also did more ambitious things that did require engineering engagement, things like moving to colder storage options for the simple storage service, right? In the beginning of the 3-year time period that I have been at Roku, we have been using like 100% in standard S3, right? And now that has been reduced to 40% only, right? So 60% of our 80 petabytes, these kind of companies, Netflix and Roku, they have a lot of data, right? All their media files are in S3, right? Served through CloudFront. So, 60% of our 80 petabyte S3 footprint is now in colder storage, which helps us to save somewhere around maybe 5% of our total cloud bill. And we also looked at Graviton, right? Graviton adoption 2 years ago was like 1 or 2%, and we are currently at about 50%, 50, right? So about half of our EC2 is now running on Graviton, and that gave us maybe another 5%, you can say, right? The savings of the savings plans shaved off maybe around 15% of our cloud bill. And we are also using one of these third-party vendors that does automated RI management, right? So on top of the savings plans, multiple times a day, they go and look at our usage, right? And they adjust the convertible RIs to match our usage. And that saved us another 10% of our cloud bill, right? Wow. So total savings are around 32.8% over the last 12 months, which improved gross margin of the entire organization by 1.6%. And that also demonstrates, right, how powerful this cloud financial management, this FinOps is, right? And, just this morning I was asked, what can you do with smaller companies, right? They can't afford a huge FinOps team. And, my recommendation there is just start small, have one person dedicated to it, maybe part-time or full-time, depending on what can be done. And the part-time could be a couple hours a week, right? It doesn't have to be 20 hours.
Yep.
And then reach out to your account manager on the cloud provider side and ask them for recommendation spreadsheets, right? This is how we got started. We got a spreadsheet from our technical account manager or our TAM with the underutilized EC2, with orphaned EBS, those kind of things, right? And that was our starting point. From then, we tried to automate most of that because at our scale, right, I can't ask an engineer to clean up 7,000 EBS volumes, right? That save us, 50 cents a piece. Because the engineer, rightfully so, will have an argument in saying like, hey, I cost like $100 or $200 an hour, and me cleaning up $3,500 of stuff, takes a couple weeks. So automation is key for those kind of situations.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, we often see cloud governance and, financial optimization all kind of bundled together with security and other considerations. But you make a strong case for really having a dedicated person who's focused on FinOps outside of just broader cloud governance. And so maybe you could speak to that. Your role as really being kind of narrowly focused on FinOps and why companies should invest in this. Why is this a best practice that others should follow, similar to what you've done at Roku and others?
Yeah, I mean, you can compare engineers working in the cloud to like an industrial kitchen, right? Where you have like 6, 8 cooks preparing meals at the same time, right? You need to clean up this place every day, otherwise it will get unsanitary and messy, right? And that the same happens in the cloud, right? We do like using cloud for the advantages that it gives, right? The elasticity that we can do an experiment, keep it around for like a couple days, and then turn it back off again, right? And also the global structure of cloud, right? If that is interesting to that organization, not every organization is a global organization, right? But overall, the having a person, a single person overlook that and surface those opportunities, right? Is the first step, right? Even if you do it just part-time. And then, you take it from there and see where else you can go with that, right? Um, the, you know, every organization will be different, and every organization will have different challenges, right? Some organizations are very siloed, right? So you need the ability to go across those business units, and that can be challenging. So the human interaction, how you collaborate, how you partner with people, right, is a key capability for this cloud financial management role, right? Um, and as needed, like depending on your organization, like Kim Weir at Target has a team of 25 people, I believe, right? Those are not all FinOps people, right? She has data engineers, full stack engineers, data scientists, and that kind of stuff, right? So, but it really depends on the organization, on what the needs are, how many team members you will have, right, and what you can do. For example, the first thing that I did when I started at Intuit is I looked at waste. And our cloud waste was at 28%. So 28% of the total bill was unnecessary spend, right? We surfaced that waste in reports where we identified the dollar value that is being actually wasted, assigned that to business leaders, and then sorted that by the highest dollar value on top, right? And over the 4 years that I spent at Intuit, we increased the visible, we call that waste sensors. A waste sensor is like a script that surfaces an opportunity, like an orphan EBS or something like that, right? And we started with 6 waste sensors, and at the end we had like over 35 of them, right? And the total waste was reduced from 28% to under 5%
Yeah.
over the year time period, right? When I started at Roku, our waste was less than 1%, right? So I'm like, there's nothing to do here, right? But then I looked around, right, and I saw like, hey, they are not using any savings plans, right? So let's make some purchases and get that up to 80%. And then I focused on forecasting, right? Where I built a forecasting system that has an average variance of 2%. People consider something like 15% being a crawl maturity, 10% being a walk maturity, and 5 being a run maturity, right? So 2% of forecast variance is well within the run maturity. So it really depends on each organization what their needs are and what you can go after.
Yeah. So Dieter, a couple of questions about two things you mentioned in your last comment there. How do you affect behavior change? To convince the engineers to act upon or prioritize the cost optimization activities. Let it be the automation piece that you just mentioned. To clean up those 50-cent detached EBS volumes, or let it be the actual cleanup itself. And then the other question is, you mentioned that you got these opportunities ranked by dollar amount and surfaced, but how do you put that data in the path of the engineer? Do you publish these dashboards to each and every team, by team, or can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, just take.
By the way, I'm Fabio Branco, Dina's teammate.
Okay, excellent. All right, so let's answer your first question. You said, how do you convince engineers? In the 10 years that I have done that, it is a top-down approach is required, where you have executive buy-in, right? And then the executives request that from their reports, right? And it goes down the hierarchy from there. If the executives have no interest in saving in the cloud, then I don't have a job at that company, basically, right? And it would be unfortunate, right, if I were to accept an offer in such a situation and then have to leave in 3 months, right? Because I don't want to get paid for doing nothing. That's very boring. So you need the top-down approach, but you also need a bottom-up approach where because the engineers, when they come out of university, they are woefully underprepared for actual how to work and how to work in the cloud, right? At the university, they teach them things like calculus, right? Differential equations, and I know about multidimensional bodies, which comes handy when you work with tensors. But really, honestly, over the 25 years, I didn't use much of that, right? That I have been working. So I do feel that maybe FinOps should be taught at universities, right, to help with the preparation process. What I do is I have monthly tech talks for each cloud provider that Roku is using. And in those tech talks, we have an engineer on the vendor side go over that product. A specific, like, for example, well architected, we did just recently, or we look at something like Bigtable or Vertex AI or some technology. And typically I have it uh, structured that the first half hour is at a high level, like maybe 100 or 200 level, right? So if a director joins, that they learn the roadmap or any new features that are available. And the second half of it is then at the 400 level, where ideally we want to see some hands-on demos and that kind of stuff, right? So we teach the engineers, that is bottoms up, right? And we work with the executives to establish a mandate that goes top down, right? Typically, I see that there is a tipping point where someone like a CFO comes and says like, hey, cloud spend is increasing more than revenue. That is leading to a point in the future where things are going to happen, right? And once the tipping point is reached, I think the organization is ready to embrace this cloud financial management a little bit more, right? The second question that you had, how are these opportunities or recommendations disseminated? We typically do that in a self-service dashboard fashion, that we built this a dashboard for something, let's say, RI coverage or waste or, something like that, right? And it's just a web page essentially, and the link is accessible to everyone within the organization. So the engineers can then go and look at their portion, their slice of that larger report. For anomalies, we do something similar like that. We have automatic anomaly detection that posts the anomalies into a Slack channel, and then the engineers are being added to that Slack channel, and they can then self-service the anomalies. And I see them talk, like, oh, I did something yesterday that was temporary. It was just an experiment, and it's over by now. We don't have to worry about that, right? So that is key because everything has to scale, right? Roku has about 4,200 employees. 2,500 of them are engineers, and there's only one FinOps person, me, right? So I'm always looking at ways on how to scale this FinOps practice and make it work across the organization.
Perfect. Yeah.
For the more mature organizations, have you been able to get FinOps back left into the architecture process where they're designing apps, knowing what it's going to cost upfront and taking that into a design discussion?
And
Yes,
to piggyback on his question, how do you make cost a first-class non-functional requirement like security, performance, availability, and so forth?
Exactly, right? So that is how we do it, right? You start with the architects, but also with the engineers, right? Because many times the engineers will have an idea, like we can improve ad targeting if we have this internal feature, so that person X gets actually served an ad that is relevant for them, right? So they have an idea and they build a proof of concept, right? And then once the proof of concept has been established, right? We can then look at cost. For example, at Intuit, I had a machine learning algorithm that on a receipt, it found what the total is. That may sound like a simple problem, but if you go and you buy things like lumber or something like that, the total is not the last number on that receipt. There's a further breakdown of taxes and other costs, right? That entire solution was something like $5,800 a month. And yes, proof of concept was successful. The machine learning algorithm was able to identify the total at like 99.98%. However, 5,800 was too expensive. So I worked with the engineer. They were able to reduce the quality of the machine learning algorithm, and it was still at 98%, right? So it was not 99.98, it was still at 98%, but we were able to run this now at $78 a month, right? And you have those initiatives. Ideally, when there is new workloads, right? Either the architect or the engineers that work on that, they want to make use a cost calculator and make an estimate, right? And then the cost calculator is a link, right? You can share that across the organization. I can look at the link, right? And then I can ask questions like, hey, this thing probably needs data transfer. I don't see data transfer anywhere. Can you please add data transfer, right? And then they add to the estimate and sort of improve the quality of that estimate, right? And that gives us then a really good idea, and we actually layer those estimates on top of the trend-based forecasting.
Awesome. Obviously, the room here is very interested in this topic, Dieter, so we'll have other questions as we go. I am curious, with reInvent just a week ago, did anything stand out to you in terms of FinOps, any product announcements that you think are going to be game changers in your world?
There were a lot of them, a lot, right? But what I took away was that there's now a Graviton 4 offer, right? That tells me that the former Annapurna Labs team is still very much innovating, right? After they built the Nitro hypervisor, they started working on Graviton, right? And which is a good thing because 50% of all of our compute is on Graviton, right? So I like to see that there is more innovation in that area, right? That was very, very comforting and good news that there is now, an R8 instance.
Great. Yep. Graviton definitely stood out to me as well. That is an amazing advancement. So I think we're on the same page. I'm just curious, sort of on the same topic, what your sort of predictions look like. Is there anything that you see coming around the corner? Maybe that even gets into what your plans are for next year. What do you think the future looks like for cost management?
I think that cost management will become more ingrained with the engineers over time, right? And certifications can help with that, not just a FinOps certification, but also, let's say, an associate or professional certification, right? If 50% of your engineering body is certified in something, that certainly helps, right? I also see that, I think Andy Jassy, I believe in 2019 said that only 5% of all IT is in the cloud, right? So we have this 95% that over time is likely to migrate to the cloud as well, right? Because you have elasticity, right, and global presence and those kind of things in the cloud. And you can do experiments, right? If I want to run an experiment with 100,000 cores over the weekend, I can do that as long as I write a check, right? I can't do that in the data center. It's not practical, right? So, these kinds of things will give organizations a competitive advantage, right? So we will see the steady influx of these sort of like new to the cloud people, right? But on the other hand, we will also see that there will be very senior people that have done cloud financial management or FinOps over the last 10 plus years, right? And I sort of compare that to maybe race car racing, right? That I don't know how useful the racing industry is, but one output of that is that some of those technologies that are getting developed for racing make it into the everyday applications of cars, right? Like maybe the anti-blocking, the ABS system, right, and fuel saving systems and those kind of things, right? So I see that that senior body that has that 10 plus years of experience drive more of these FinOps innovations, maybe around automation and those kind of things, right? Whenever a vendor comes to me and says like, hey, I have this great idea, look what we can do. I always ask them, and what if I have 10,000 of those items? Now it becomes a click fest, right? What can you do to help me automate that, right? That is one of my first questions. So this senior body will drive sort of like FinOps innovation, while we will see this large group of people slowly migrate in the cloud.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a big topic for us as well. You mentioned the 5%. A lot of the work as a CSM function has been helping customers get to the cloud. That was sort of the earlier stage of the role. Now with more and more customers who have made that move, optimization and modernization, right sizing, all of the benefits of that post-migration motion are more and more of the focus. And certainly cost optimization is central to that. The value proposition, along with business agility and the flexibility and all the other benefits, that is something we're thinking about, talking about more and more. So what you do, I think, is critical for that partnership between the CSM and our customer. We'd love to see people who are dedicated in this role everywhere to give us what we call single-threaded ownership across a particular area of cost for cloud governance, because it's got to be there. It's just essential for this overall cloud proposition to make sense. It's really got to be, not just getting in, but then once you're there, going through all of the optimization, so you really see the true benefits. Dina, I think you had another question also for Dieter. Do you want to dive in here?
Yeah, thank you, Nick. I just want to make sure that we have time because it's 11:31. Dieter, are you okay for one more question or? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's no fire chat goes without GenAI. And what advice do you have for AWS to stay on the top of its game?
Oh, far am I to give advice to Amazon Web Services, but I did like the introduction of Q, right? Isn't that like a character on Star Trek also, like an all-knowing?
Yes, the all-knowing
Or
Q.
Bond, right?
Yes.
Q,
Yeah.
he's the scientist in the basement, yeah.
So yeah, that was really interesting, right? And but I just spoke to a stealth startup that is doing something similar for networking, right? And they asked me how successful will this be? And I said there is fundamentally a gap that needs to be overcome, right? Because engineers are used to uh, typing on the command line using a console, right? And now doing Google searches that is that it's different, right? They are not used to that. Um, Maybe being able to talk to it, right? But then you need to have really good voice recognition because there's, diverse cultures, diverse accents, and, I always have difficulties with these types of tools understanding me, right? But it would be kind of cool if you could just ask a Gen AI, right? Well, why is this account so expensive, right? And the answer comes back with, well, you have this huge database here. And by the way, the query that you're running is a select count star, which is the most run query on this database. So if you can figure out how to optimize that, you will be able to reduce cost in that account by 80%, right? I think there's value definitely in this, right? The other thing that I noticed is the large language models are really still in their infancy, right? Um, they use the concept of a token. A token, think of it as a word. It's not really that, but think of it as a word, right? And once we are able to have large language models that can take 1 million tokens as an input or 10 million tokens as an input, so like, the entire law text of a state, for example, right? We will be able to do much different things than just play around what we do today, right? We will be able to ask questions like, hey, how does trespass law look like in Kansas, right? How is it different from other states or something like that, right? And for that, it is important that you have the right hardware, right? You can't do that with conventional computers, even if you have 100,000 of them. That's not going to do it, right? And so the partnership with NVIDIA, I took that as a very forward-thinking way of Amazon Web Services to solidify the road into that direction, right? Because without being able to do those exaflop calculations, right? Um, these newer technologies will not be possible, right? So I'm really looking forward to the first company that can replace doctors, for example, or replace lawyers, right? Because for the most part, when I have a problem, I just Google it, and unfortunately, sometimes there's not very useful results, right? So maybe having one of those large language models really be able to, hey, I want to set up a trust in California. Can you print out the trust document, right? The 200 pages. That would be fantastic. These kinds of applications, they are going to come in the next few years.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the day where Googling a medical ailment doesn't scare me to death. So hopefully that's coming soon. I think we have a few more minutes. Hopefully, Peter, you can stay if there's any final questions from the room. This is so interesting and helpful to have your direct input here. So anyone else with a question?
I have one, Dieter. This is such an insightful talk, so thank you for taking time. My question is, when you look at cost optimization, do you look at it holistically across some things you may have on-prem or in different clouds or SaaS providers, or do you go like cloud by cloud and say, let's optimize AWS and the other cloud or on-prem? How do you approach it?
I typically do it cloud specific because the differences between clouds are huge, right? If you take AWS Simple Storage Service, if I have something that is glacial or archive, right? If I want that object, it will be rehydrated into a staging area out of which it will be deleted in 30 days, right? And when you look at these things on the GCP side, they work completely differently. If I have an object in an archive layer, I can access it immediately within like 20 milliseconds, right? However, it then is on a 365-day life cycle, right? As it ages back out into the archive layer. So the technology differences are very substantial, right? And for example, there's no transition cost going on the Google side between different storage options. While on the AWS side, there is a transition cost. I know because we just had an engineer that moved 3.6 billion objects to global that incurred an $80,000 cost, right? So the technologies are vastly between the clouds, and so the optimization approaches are also very different.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, Dieter, this has been terrific. I know that you're a YouTube creator. I don't know if you want to plug your channel. I'm assuming it's on FinOps as a way to sort of broadly communicate best practices. So if there's somewhere we can go to follow you, please share that.
Yep. I just put my website here. You guys can check me out there. Everything that there's to know is on that website. Feel free to reach out again, maybe for specific topics, right? Like how to establish a FinOps practice in a small company. I can walk you through that, those kind of things.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back and maybe dive deeper into some of these topics. So thank you again. It was wonderful to meet you and have you here.
Thanks for having me. All right, take care. Bye.